I'm Andre Cacciatorian in the Nessun Studios in Watertown, and I'm with Matt Perino from the brand new UFC headquarters in Las Vegas, Nevada. We're going to preview UFC 211 today. Matt, how are you, and how is the new headquarters going?
I'm great, and the headquarters are amazing. I mean, we're all, 300 or so UFC Las Vegas employees under one roof now. It's a huge, beautiful campus with, they're building the Performance Institute now, but it's pretty amazing.
That's cool. One time when I'm in Vegas, I'm going to have to check that place out, and then we'll go hit the craps table or something. We'll have a good time. But let's talk about this stacked card in Dallas, Texas this Saturday. So we've got two championship fights. And I always love when there's two title fights. Let's talk about the heavyweight showdown first between Junior Dos Santos and the current champion Stipe Miocic. It's a rematch, so it's going to be a devastating rematch amongst titans. We have Miocic defending his title again, going up against Dos Santos. What do you see in this fight going into the card?
hmm Well, like you said, it's a rematch, but these are two different fighters in two different places in their career. Stipe Miocic, the number 6 or 7 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet right now, has been tearing through the competition. Alistair Overeem, who just beat recently Junior Dos Santos 2 fights ago, Stipe Miocic made quick work of it. I mean, you go back to the rematch and you watch it, and I did, and Stipe Miocic was dominating the fight, I think, in the first 10 minutes. But what happened was he was really trying to utilize his wrestling because JDS was supposed to have the boxing advantage. But if you watch closely in those first 10 minutes, Stipe was going blow for blow with this guy. He rocked him a few times. I think if he doesn't attempt as many takedowns in this fight, I think he'll be a little bit more successful.
So you're saying you think Stipe is going to be more successful if he doesn't go for the takedowns?
Right. I mean, that's his background, is the wrestling, but he only landed 1 of 18 takedowns in that fight. JDS has some of the best, historically best takedown defense in the division. So I think for Stipe to be successful, I think he's got to trust in his hands, which I think he has enough confidence now. He's done it against some of the top guys, taking out Fabricio Verdum, taking out Alistair Overeem. I think he's going to test those hands on JDS.
I don't know. I kind of disagree with you here. I think he has to stick to that same strategy. You look at Dos Santos' fight against Cain Velasquez, both of his fights. He lost both of those fights. He was taken down 13 times combined in those 2 fights. So I think Stipe, he has that wrestling background. I understand Dos Santos has great defense, but I think he's just got to stick to that strategy, try to get him to the ground. And I think he's evolved as a fighter, too, in the last 3 years, Miocic has. I mean, that's when they last fought. It was 2.5, 3 years ago. A lot has changed since then. Miocic has developed as a fighter. Of course, he has that great knockout talent. We've seen in the last 3 fights, 3 knockout finishes in the first round. I think he's going to make quick work in this. I think we're going to see in the second or third round, Stipe defends his title. What do you think?
I think I'm going with Stipe as well. I do agree with you there. I will say that I wouldn't abandon the wrestling completely. What I'm saying is 18 takedown attempts over the course of 25 minutes is not a winning recipe for anybody, because you're just going to drain yourself. And then when you're in these stand-up exchanges with somebody as tough as JDS, who throws power punches, and you're eating those consistently, Stipe was real tired in that 5th round, and he's going to need to conserve his energy as this one goes forward.
Yeah, I think I do agree in one way. I think if the fight continues to go on, and we go to the 4th and 5th round, maybe that takedown strategy will be something that Miocic will want to get away from it, because you definitely don't want to tire yourself out. But first few rounds, why not? Go for it. Try to get him to the ground, use your wrestling advantage, and try to finish him on the ground. But that's the heavyweight title fight. Now we go to the women's strawweight championship bout. Joanna Jedrzejczyk, the undefeated Joanna Jedrzejczyk, going up against Jessica Andrade, who's, kind of came out of nowhere. She beat Angela Hill in Houston in February, and all of a sudden she gets a title shot. I honestly don't know if she even deserved the title shot to begin with. What do you think about that?
Well, the interesting thing about Jessica is, I think, for those in the know, when she dropped down from 135 to 115, it was interesting because she was very tough. She accumulated a 4-3 record, about 500, had her struggles at 135 pounds, but at 115, making that weight consistently, she becomes one of the most powerful punchers in the division, and she's going up against Joanna Jedrzejczyk, who has been the most devastating striker in the division. So that matchup in and of itself, I think this is going to be the toughest test for Joanna to date, because not only does she bring the striking and some wrestling and some jiu-jitsu, Andrade does, but she brings the power. She could stop this fight at any moment. And Joanna, as good as she's been, and listen, I will get up on my soapbox and talk about how good Joanna Jedrzejczyk has been. She's been one of the best in the UFC for the past 2-3 years. But Jessica can beat her because she can land punches, and Joanna tends to eat punches.
Wow, I don't know if it's going to be as close as you think or as the public thinks. Look, this fight started out on OddsShark minus 235 in favor of Jedrzejczyk. It's moved down to minus 185. So obviously the public is putting their money on Andrade. So it's interesting that you and the public feel that way. I look at Joanna and look at this stat. This stat just jumps in my face. 746 significant strikes compared to just 245 allowed. I think that's in her last 5 fights, 5 or 6 fights. But that's 501 more significant strike. That's an unbelievable differential. So I understand Andrade's bigger. She looks like she's bigger. She can definitely strike much better than Joanna's past opponents. But then again, I look at Andrade's past opponents, and they just don't pop out. You got Angela Hill, Joanne Calderwood, Penne, I don't know. So this is definitely going to be her toughest match, and it's against the best. And plus, Joanna has the advantage when it comes to these longer fights. This is going to be 5 rounds. Jessica hasn't been in that situation before, so I think because of the experience and just pure dominance alone, I'm going with Joanna in this one. Do you think there's going to be an upset in this?
There could be an upset, but no, there won't be, because listen,
at least we agree on that then.
Like I told you, she's one of the best pound for pound fighters on this roster the past few years. She goes in there, and her approach to the game is second to none. I mean, she does the fight week, the lead up, the weight cut, and then the fight itself. But just remember, Jessica's getting this shot because Joanna's gone through everybody else in this division. Yeah. There is no one else left. I mean, Rose Namajunas, huge win over the Karate Hottie in her last fight. That could be next after that, and people have been talking about that fight for a while. But Jessica Andrade, all she's done is won. She's won 3 in a row. She took out Angela Hill, and I think the one thing, though, that I will say about Andrade is she hit Angela Hill a lot and wasn't able to finish her. If you're going to beat Joanna Jedrzejczyk, as we've seen in the Claudia Gadelha fights, you're going to have to finish her.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the it's going to be 25-minute fight, 5-round fight. You look at the average fight time for these two fighters. Jedrzejczyk 18 minutes 23 seconds. Andrade just 9 minutes and 48 seconds. So I don't know. We'll see how the endurance factor plays into this as well. I think that just going 5 rounds is going to be a big change for Jessica, and the fact that Joanna has that experience will really help her out. All right, let's move on. There's a bunch of it's a stacked card, Matt, and we only have so much time. So we're going to do a little bit of fact or fiction, talk about some of the other fights and other big MMA topics. You ready for some fact or fiction, Matt?
I'm always ready for fact or fiction. Let's go.
I'm excited that you're always ready for fact or fiction, because I'm always ready for it too. Look, again, as I mentioned, the card is stacked. You look at the main card, it's wow, jumps in your face. Then you look at the preliminary card, and you see a very familiar, popular name in there, Eddie Alvarez. Like, what's he doing in the preliminary card? It's like, fact or fiction? This is an insult to a former champion like Eddie Alvarez being on the preliminary card of this UFC 211.
I'm going to go with fiction, and I think people, and I'm going to tell you why. I think people don't understand how these fights are lined up. I mean, if you're a part of a stat card like this, all those fights, one after the other, it's great. It's great for us fans, but for the fighters, you almost get lost in the shuffle, I think.
Matt, I agree that in terms of for the fans, it's going to be great because you get Eddie Alvarez on the preliminary card, and it's kind of a good build up to the main card. But I think for Eddie Alvarez, fiction. It's fact. It's absolutely insulting for this guy. This guy was a champion. He went up against Conor McGregor. The build-up for that fight was huge. Prideful guy. He's very proud of his work throughout the years. Came out of nowhere, became the champion, and now here he is on the preliminary card. I'm not too sure he's deep down inside he's happy about that. But I do think it's going to light a fire in him, and I think he'll win the fight because of it. To kind of, stick it to the UFC's face and just, build on that, and maybe next time he will headline a card or something like that. Maybe get back in the title hunt, which, I mean, it's a lightweight division. There isn't going to be any title fights in that division anytime soon. But I don't know. I just don't know if it's a good thing for him.
I think, the the way Eddie lost in his last fight and on the stage that he was on, I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing to take a step back if that's
Yeah,
indeed what you think
yeah.
this is. I think this is a way for him to kind of recalibrate things, get back to the drawing board, get back to what got him to the dance, what was allowed him to win the title. I think he's in a good place. I think everybody that's talked to him says that he's in a good place and he's motivated.
Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty devastating loss when you look at it. But let's move on to another former Conor McGregor opponent, Nate Diaz and his brother Nick Diaz. They were in the news this week. They're not going to be in UFC 211. They're not on any cards in the future. They're just very MIA, both of them. And but it's Dana White says that he's been offering these guys fights, and they just keep turning them down. And then Nate Diaz went on the MMA Hour and took a couple shots at Conor McGregor. He said, quote, "Conor is a bleeping bleep. He bleeping got his ass whooped. He got choked. And now he's justifying it because the decision went to him because the company wanted it to go to him. If I get my bleeping ass whooped by somebody, I don't just win a slight decision and accept it as a win. So the real champ is right here." And then he went on to say, "I don't want a bleeping third fight. Bleep Conor. He can bleeping fight himself." So, in pure Nate Diaz fashion, his favorite word in the English vocabulary, the F-bomb, just throws it out there everywhere. So it looks like he's not going to be fighting anytime soon. Fact or fiction, Nate Diaz and his brother Nick will never fight again.
Another day, another week, another month in the fight game, which it is the fight game, folks. I mean, if we're not used to this by now, we're never going to be used to it. I mean, Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, Nick Diaz, all the great talkers, they do this very, very well. They get things going. They get the media, headlines swirling. But I think that these two guys are fighters. I think, the right opportunity may not have come along yet for either of these guys to step back in the octagon. Maybe Nate does have a point there. Maybe he feels that Tony should fight Conor, and he wants to wait to see how that fight plays out. He said himself he's in the middle of triathlon season, so he's in no rush to get back. He's made a lot of money, as Dana White has said, as has Nick. And I think when the time comes and that itch comes and the right opponent comes, I think then that's when we'll see the Diaz brothers back.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think he'll fight again too, and not anytime soon. I don't know about Nick, but definitely Nate. He'll be back in there. You just look at the money to be made from another Diaz McGregor fight. How can you say no to that? We're just kind of waiting to see what happens with this McGregor Mayweather thing. But once that's out of the way and he's back in the UFC, everyone's going to be looking forward to that Diaz McGregor fight. And Diaz knows I honestly thought that fight was much closer than people make it out to be. I think Diaz had a legitimate shot to win, and Diaz knows that. So he probably wants a third fight deep down. So do you think that this is a type of a ploy for Nate to just, in case this Conor and Floyd thing doesn't work out, that maybe sometime later in this year we'll see Nate and Conor fight again?
I think everything that Nate Diaz and Nick Diaz does is very calculated. Really? I think that they're always kind of thinking about the next move. He said it himself. I mean, he's left a blueprint for a lot of that. He believes that, his actions and the way that he carried himself early in his career kind of laid a blueprint for Conor McGregor and other types of fighters to come along after the fact. So he is an expert in the fight game. He knows how to pull certain strings, and he's very entertaining. So I expect nothing less from the Diaz brothers.
All right, so let's go to the last fact or fiction. Damian Maia, Tyron Woodley said earlier this week that Maia made a mistake to take the Jorge Masvidal fight. He should have waited, and he would have gotten a title shot. Do you think Maia made a mistake? Fact or fiction?
I'm going to say fiction, and this one was a hard one for me because there's two sides to this. I do believe that this is a serious, serious risk for Damian Maia, a guy who has spent the last few years on this uphill, treacherous climb toward a title shot that he feels that has eluded him several times now. He thought he did enough before his fight with Carlos Condit to earn a title shot, and then he beat Carlos Condit, and he's kind of just been waiting. Unfortunately for him, circumstances in the UFC sometimes dictate other fights, and we needed that rematch between Wonder Boy and Tyron Woodley. But I will say that it's fiction. I think Damian Maia is a fighter. I think he wants to fight the best in the business. And you know what? I don't like the idea. I'm with Dana. I don't like the idea of you sitting out fights because you know what happens? You never know what can happen. I mean, you're going to fight these
Exactly.
guys anyway. You're going to fight a Jorge Masvidal if he gets another big win. You're going to fight Carlos Condit. You're going to fight Stephen Thompson. So whether you have the belt or not, you're going to have to fight these guys. And I think if he's so confident that he's the championship material, he's going to go out there and prove it.
Yeah, I mean, what if Lawler took the fight against Masvidal and Lawler was spectacular in that fight, and all of a sudden, Maia was sitting out and they give, Lawler and Woodley fight for a title, and Maia's chance goes away. So I think this is good. Maia's being active. There's nothing wrong with being active. And the guy's on a 6-fight winning streak. I think he's going to win this week. It'll be a 7-fight winning streak. Then he absolutely deserves a title shot next time around. So I don't think it's a mistake either. But looking at this card again, let's keep moving forward. And there's one guy I want to talk about before we go. You love this guy. We were talking about this before we got on air. Under 25 from Mexico. It's Cinco de Mayo today. So this Cinco de Mayo week, this past week. So Yair Rodriguez, great fighter. He looks dominant, very young, bright future. What do you think of his fight coming up against Frankie Edgar?
I'm so glad that you brought this one up. I didn't want to get out of here without talking about Rodriguez versus Edgar. I just found out by watching some videos that Yair Rodriguez actually asked for Frankie Edgar in this fight. He went to Sean Shelby, said he wanted Frankie Edgar. He wanted to test himself. He's ready for that elite level. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, this guy has been spectacular. What he did to BJ Penn, and now listen, BJ Penn is far past his prime.
Yeah.
He came back after a lot of time outside the octagon. So I'm not putting too much stock into that. But the dominant way that he has performed and his skills standing up really elevate him as a prospect and now a rising, surging contender. He's ranked number 7. He's climbing up the ladder, a win over number 2 Frankie Edgar, and he's right there for a potential title shot.
Yeah, I mean, very stylish guy too. He's wearing some fancy blue suede shoes in Brooklyn at UFC 208. We'll see if those the fanciness translates into the octagon. And maybe, I mean, it's a big matchup. Frankie Edgar is easily going to be his toughest opponent yet. And again, you talked about that BJ Penn fight. That really made him like a household name in the UFC community. I mean, everybody found out about who he was then because that was a devastating knockout, and it was the main fight, and he made quick work of him. And I think he's going to win again. I like this guy. I think this guy's going to be competing for a title belt sometime in 2017. That's my bold prediction, UFC bold prediction.
I'm actually going to go with Yair as well. I think he moved to Chicago. He was training out at Albuquerque at Jackson Wink. He moved to Chicago to specifically really focus on his wrestling. And I think that's going to be important in this fight because Frankie Edgar, who just took on a bigger Jeremy Stevens in his last outing, landed 5 takedowns en route to the victory. I think Yair could see his back in this fight, but I think his youth, his athleticism, his takedown defense, I think would all play, and he'll be able to keep this one standing for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to have, good young prospects rising in the sport. I mean, where's Conor? Ronda Rousey's gone. So it'll be interesting to see what happens down the road with this guy. He and another guy I love, Cody Garbrandt, both have great potential to be the future faces of the sport. But Matt, thank you so much for joining us. This is fantastic. UFC 211 this Saturday night on pay-per-view. Check it out. And for all of your UFC news, either keep it here on NESN.com or go to UFC.com. Thanks a lot, Matt, for joining us.
Thank you, Andre.